Hi folks, and welcome to the pretty much a wrapping up section of this course, right? This is going to be the last or one of the last two videos. The second one will be about WordPress and creating that portfolio. But this one's just going to focus on the literature review, and I'll also just tell you really quickly about the resume that I expect you to have as well. So we have a weekly folder that's just called Wrapping Up. So this is kind of what you'll use for the next 2 weeks, week and a half. And in there you have a folder called Literature Review. So your literature review is going to be due on December 17th by the end of the day, so midnight on the 17th. And if you did your annotated bibliography, then you're more than halfway done with the literature review already. It's really about kind of putting those sources into an order that makes sense, changing some of the wording, making any edits that I suggested, and then including an introduction and a conclusion, and we'll talk about that in a second. So in this literature review folder, you've got obviously a place to upload your literature review. You have the grading rubric that I'm going to use, the outline of what I expect from you, a good example of a literature review, and then a website that talks about the differences between the annotated bibliography and the literature review. And again, just a link to creating the right citations. So the literature review is a little bit different from an annotated bibliography. In the annotated bibliography, each citation is kind of separated, and in the literature review, they'll all be together like in a regular essay. They'll be more grouped around themes, and you kind of won't say in this study anymore, right? Because that's something where in the annotated bibliography, the citation for that study was right above it, so I know what study you're talking about. Now you're going to have to use a reference to kind of refer to the specific study that you're talking about. So here is the website that kind of looks at the two of these and kind of compares them, right? So the annotated bibliography is a list of sources. The literature review is more of an overview of all of the sources together. The structure, the sources are separated in the annotated bibliography. In the literature review, it's integrated, right? It's more of an essay. And then in the literature review, you use an introduction to explain the topic and conclude by summarizing. And our conclusion will be a little bit different as well. So there's lots of good information here on how to sort of go from being an annotated bibliography to a literature review. Don't get too caught up in this. Focus more on the outline and the example that I've posted for you. So here's the example. I want the outline. Oops. Here we go. Here's the outline. So this is worth 20 points. Okay. The introduction is 1 to 2 paragraphs giving a little bit of background on the topic. It could include some statistics or a hook to get the reader interested. Any concepts that you need to explain, right? If I don't know the term, then you should explain that concept there. And a little bit of a justification. Why is this topic important to study, right? Then you'll do the literature review, which will be at least 4 paragraphs. So that'll be the summary of your 5 sources, especially focusing on the main findings and what the study contributed to your knowledge of the topic. And remember to introduce studies, use in-text citations and transitions, and group by theme if applicable. So we'll take a look at what that looks like in a minute. And then your conclusion, right? 1 to 2 paragraphs. So based on the literature, what conclusions can you draw about the topic? Can you recommend any policy recommendations, right? So all of you have been studying things that are pretty important to society, right? If it's the visibility and protection of people who are transgender, if it's about school shootings or serial killers, right? You've all had really interesting, intense topics this semester. So what are some policy recommendations you can make? What should we change as a society, right, based on what you've learned? Or how do you think people can study this in the future? You've read a lot of methodology, right? Do you have any ideas of how this or what aspects of this need to be further studied? And then you want to include your citations. So the grading rubric is pretty straightforward. You get points, for making sure you discuss 5 sources, the introduction, the meat of it, really, the literature, and then the conclusion where you talk about policy recommendations and make sure you add those citations in. This time they would all go at the end. So now to quickly look at an example, right? This is a good example of a literature review. Currently, most countries receive undocumented people through the year, leading to a high level of refugees across the world, right? So she's starting with an interesting a sentence that gets you interested, right? Oh, refugees, this is something that and immigration is something that we talk about all the time in this country, right? So she's presenting this interesting topic and getting the reader pulled in. And she goes on to kind of explain why it's important to be studying this. She's talking about children being separated from their parents, and she says, since the children remain as citizens, the significant impacts extend to the society and the entire country. The affected children are expected to become future leaders and employees, but may be less performing due to deportation stress, right? So what is the effect of deportation on kids? Now, the important part is to look at how she structures this literature review, right? So she has some sentences of her own, and then she says, in the U.S., there are more than 4.5 million children of immigrants who are citizens by birth in the U.S. And then she gives the citation there. So she's, she doesn't know this off the top of her head, right? No one's born knowing this knowledge. You got this knowledge from someone else. She's citing where she got that knowledge from. Then you can also kind of cite them within the sentence. So, however, according to Zayas and Gulbas, 2017, children of immigrants have legal status but experience the continuous threat of parental deportation. So she's doing a really good job of using her own words, and it always has to be your own words, right? Unless you're quoting and citing the page. But she's doing a really good job of citing that literature, referring to that literature, both in an end of text citation and within the sentence itself, okay? So she does it throughout the literature review, and you can take a look at that as an example. And then finally, there's the conclusion, which goes into, the conclusions and the main findings, and also some recommendations for what could be done. And then finally, the references. So this is a perfect paper. It's 4 pages long, right? Really 3 pages of text. So you don't need to get super out of control here. It really doesn't need to be something that's very long. It just needs to do a good job of synthesizing the literature and summarizing that all together. So if you have any questions about the literature review, I have a lot of sources here for you, but if you have any questions, as always, get in touch with me. So that's due on December 17th, end of the semester. And then you'll have your resume. So this is just a link to Mercy's resume resources. If you don't have a resume already, this is a good time to write one. If you do already have a resume, you might want to update it or even make it specific to some of those jobs that you said you were interested in, or internships that you said you were interested in on the discussion board a few weeks ago. Your resume is going to go on your WordPress site. So it's not something that's graded on its own. It's going to be graded as part of your WordPress. If you want me to look it over and give you some feedback beforehand, I'm happy to, but it's not something that you have to submit or that will be graded on its own. It's something that you're just going to work on now and then add to your WordPress. And like I said, that video will be coming later in the day, and you'll be able to look at how to set up everything in the WordPress as well. So as always, if you have any questions about the literature review or the resume, please get in touch with me, and I hope you have a great day.